Audit automation. So basically, we're going to talk about audit automation, sorry. And we're going to just do this in kind of a town hall fashion. I'm just going to ask questions. They all know the questions, so they've prepared answers, but obviously we'll let the audience also ask questions. And just a brief, quick introduction. I've got Janice on the far left over there from Ernst & Young, or E&Y, I guess they just call themselves now, right?
Right, yeah.
And Thomas McKenzie from KPMG, and Dib Har, is that right? Har? Okay, from PwC. He has a longer name, as you can see up here, but I'm going to stick with the shorter version of his name. And then Malik from Deloitte, who's substituting for Chris. We didn't get the slide updated, so I apologize for that. So anyways, I'm just going to get started. And what I'm going to do is just ask the panelists to start out with just a real brief 30,000-foot view of what their firm is doing in the area of audit automation. Okay? Now they have 14 questions, and I've asked them, do not answer all 14 questions in your introduction. Just kind of give us the quick 30,000-foot view. So I'm just going to start with Janice over there and give us a quick 30,000-foot view at E&Y.
Sure. So, I don't know if this will
Yeah.
move this over. So I think our focus at this point in time is on what we would determine as audit automation with data analytics, as opposed to big data, which I know was another one of the topics. So looking at using data analytics in both the risk assessment as we are starting, somewhat to control testing, substantive analytics, and substantive test of the audit. Auditing, doing automation for those portions where we can, so things like tie-outs or things like that would be essentially where we are at this point.
Okay.
In our firm, really the focus is first to understand the client needs and the audit automation needs case to case. Sometimes it varies by industry, sometimes it varies by the nature of the client. So what we are trying to see is that where is really the benefit with respect to the cost that is incurred, especially at the beginning, to do the audit automation. Many of our clients are looking for us to do that audit automation, and those are the clients that we are starting with, where the scenario fits with the audit automation techniques that we are coming up with. But we are taking a phased approach, not a big bang approach, trying that out with the clients where it works, and then spreading it to other clients in the same bracket.
Okay. Thomas?
To KPMG, you've got me stuck on office automation. Audit automation it's a really simple concept for us. It's just how do we take this concept of data and the fact that there is more of it and it's coming at us faster. How do we take this concept of automation and the fact that technology is cheaper, faster, and more readily available, and this concept of our clients have invested in sophisticated ERP systems, and how do we bring all three of those together and harness it so that we can deliver more value and insights for our clients and at the same time improve the effectiveness and the efficiency of an audit.
Okay, thanks. Alan?
At Deloitte, we're also into the analytics. We're looking into that area as well. But one of the kind of specific areas we're currently embarked on is the unstructured portion. As you know, big data. One of the things about it is structured as well as unstructured. So that's one of the areas we are looking at in terms of using artificial intelligence as well as machine learning.
Okay. Oh, they were so good. And the 30,000-foot view. All right, great. Malik briefly mentioned big data. Let me just ask kind of a follow-up question, because I guess I want to ask it in two different ways. Kind of how is big data affecting you, and kind of what is your definition of big data? I mean, because there's some confusion. We hear people talk about big data, and sometimes their examples aren't, I would consider, really big data and stuff. So just real quick, Malik, since you mentioned big data, let's just start at this end and talk a little bit about big data.
Yeah, well, I guess in terms of the big data, I use the traditional definition of big data in terms of Gartner, volume, variety, velocity, and veracity. In terms of that, however, that being said, I think one of the biggest challenges is actually still is getting data from the client. That's always a big issue. So getting to big data is still not something that's kind of readily accessible, except for the truly massive clients.
Thomas?
So for us, it's exactly as said. So we have the textbook definition of big data, and I think in the context of the external audit, it has got a little bit of overexposure, if you ask me. We as audit professionals have been dealing with data for a very long time. It just so happens now that there's more of it, and it's coming at us from different avenues. So in terms of big data, in mountains and mountains of data, and trying to extract things out of the data, that's interesting. But from an audit perspective, it's remaining focused for us on the data that we know we can get. It just happens to be more of it because our clients are producing more data themselves, and it's been able to stay focused on that data that's relevant to either an internal or an external audit. So, we often try and counsel people to not get stuck in the trap of big data is this big thing and there's just going to be this mountain of data. It's all around, staying focused to the data that's relevant to an audit and the data that can easily be converted into audit evidence, be that for internal or external data.
Okay.
Yeah, from my perspective, I would agree with the comments from the other panelists. I just want to add one more thing is the linkage with the audit objective. The audit risk is very key, and also the quality of the data in the big data is also very important, because as opposed to a management decision making, in case of the audit, it gets reviewed by regulatory bodies. So the quality and the validation of the data that we are using as audit evidence here becomes very important. So you're getting it from the right source and you can really rely on it, and it has to be linked with the audit risk. So that's, I think, is one of the key things in the audit automation we are required to understand about big data.
So you're not going to just poke around in all the big data just to poke around in the big data?
Absolutely.
Okay. Janice?
Yeah, and I would just say, when we talk to clients as far as harnessing big data, or that we would look at that from a different perspective. So clients are looking at big data to be able to determine, what customers they want, what products they should be selling, and looking at data from a very different perspective. So their big data and our big data are very different. So we are, I think, as the other panelists have talked about it, we are generally looking at more structured data, looking at information that can help us with the audit as they go along. The big data that companies are looking at, I would say, is more of the unstructured, looking at the available information, coupling that with socioeconomic trends, et cetera, and determining how they're going to kind of go forward in their companies, as opposed to we're really looking at it from a backwards view.
Okay. Now, Dib mentioned not taking a big bang approach, I think, or something like this was the term you used. So my next question is kind of, as you think about what clients you want to at least start doing more automated auditing, I'll get the term out eventually, how do you decide? Is it just client cooperation? Is there certain characteristics of a client that just makes them a good candidate for this kind of activity, or what? So again, let's start with Janice this time and work back this way. Janice, so what is kind of that ideal client, and maybe even the opposite? What's the client that just wouldn't make sense for audit automation?
So I think those that have disparate systems, that you have a lot of legacy systems not talking to each other, that don't have, that have multiple different instances, that you're not going to be able to utilize it to the greatest extent. We'll still look at aspects of it, but we wouldn't have the whole big bang, versus those that are a sophisticated company that have one single ERP system that is being utilized, say, either across companies, across countries, et cetera. Those are by far the most ideal. From a data analytics perspective, those companies where trends can be more predictive, where you can actually pull down that data and then be able to easily or more easily determine anomalies, et cetera, within that, as opposed to those that have absolutely no predictiveness, and you're pulling down the data and absolutely everything is an anomaly, because that just adds to doing more work and going down a rabbit hole that you wouldn't want.
Okay. Dib?
I would agree with that scenario. Definitely that's one of the good ones to start with. I would add one other scenario which we find very useful, especially the clients who have high volume of transaction of a routine nature. So if you're seeing that most of the revenue transactions are coming from 3 or 4 channels, and if it happens to be high volume and low value, and the typical transaction controls are very similar, the processes are similar, that could be a very good candidate for doing an audit automation. And even within that client, if you see, there are various types of transaction streams where you see there is more routine and higher volume in certain streams. You can start with that and then expand that into the other ones in a gradual way. And that's what I meant by a phased approach rather than a big bang approach.
Okay, great. Thomas?
So I agree with the two panelists. I mean, from our perspective, I mean, we recognize that audit automation, it doesn't only apply to large clients, it doesn't only apply to clients that have sophisticated ERPs, it applies to the profession as a whole. It's just where we want to start. So when I say it applies to the profession as a whole is, there is one large part of this is the data that we get out of the client systems, which generally you would want your client to have a well-tested and implemented ERP system, but there is other data sources that we can use to improve the predictive nature of an audit, which cuts across clients. Could be our smallest client to our largest client, in a sense of using data to better focus the audit. In terms of specifically trying to figure out how we phase the deployment of this into the profession is, as the panelists have mentioned, clearly a very important part of this is the systems that our clients used, and clearly the more sophisticated their systems are means the more sophisticated they are in a sense of understanding what the data is telling them, what controls they need to have in place, and how they manage the execution of their business. So those are the easiest clients to start with, because the other side of the coin is, as a profession, we've got to transform. So our professionals today are not necessarily sufficiently literate to be able to go in and understand what data means and understand what automation means. So we need to phase it in on those large clients where invariably the client is sophisticated, the firms are able to make an investment in the engagement teams to accelerate the transformation and the deployment of automation.
Okay.
I too agree with all the other panelists. For me, it's about data complexity, not necessarily small clients or large clients, but you could have a very small client with a very simple data structure and a very large client with a very complex one. So it's not when you're kind of trying to do your risk in terms of automation, which kind of client to work with. I see that as sort of a driver, and that's again from the structured side of things. The interesting thing was when it comes to the unstructured side of things, and in a sense it's a kind of level playing field, because it's all unstructured, and it's a matter of more of how you can deploy that technology to kind of go across that. So I find that it's interesting, whereas we move more to unstructured analysis of like contracts and documents and agreements and things like that, then it's easier to go across all our client base.
Just a quick follow-up. Anybody can answer this question, but how important is I'm not quite even sure how to ask this question, but how important is the client's willingness and or even demand? I mean, are you getting demands from clients saying, gee, we're doing all this audit automation or this automation, how come you guys aren't more automated? How much of that figures into this client selection?
Well, so from what we've seen in the marketplace is so there's two ways to answer that question. It's clearly the profession needs to innovate and transform, so we need to get into this game of data analytics. But I think it's not the exception that clients are asking for this. The general marketplace is asking for this. Yes. So with all the reform that's happening in the European Union around audit rotation in the external audit market, it's very rare that we will receive tenders and proposals these days where clients aren't asking, what are you, audit firm, doing in the realm of data analytics, in the realm of automation, in the realm of applying technology to improve the effectiveness of my audit engagement. So I think it's both ends. There's a pull from the market and there's a push from the profession around trying to get automation in.
Okay.
But I think it is also equally important, like those clients that it will work with the best are those that are most willing to work with you. So the ones that are not participatory and it was like, oh, we tried this once and like that was it, then obviously that really puts a kibosh on it. But certainly to the point, we are definitely seeing it across the market. It doesn't matter what country you're in or what field you're looking at now, the data analytics and what we're doing, just to be able to get that deeper understanding faster than you would have been able to in the past.
And also just from the practical angle, many of the clients are quite busy with many projects. So for them to support an audit becomes a bigger headache these days, because in the past there were dedicated people full year supporting audit. Now they are engaged in multiple projects. So that's where the clients are looking at efficiencies coming from the auditors, so that they can free up those people to do other projects but still manage to support the audit. And that's where the need for automation comes into play, where you can get the data in a much more automated and seamless manner, potentially in many cases where we are not getting it, we are using manual processes of capturing that. And that's the push coming from clients.
Okay.
And in terms, especially I think in the current sort of state we're in, where we're kind of moving away from the traditional paradigm that we've been using audit for the last decades or so, towards more this towards to a more an automated kind of paradigm. It's critical to find those clients that are willing to work with you and experiment, because in terms of because when you're trying to, and that's critical from a point of view of trying to sell that innovation, not just to other clients, but also internally, right? It's to say that, we did such and such with clients X, Y, Z, and we found these kind of actionable, this is the kind of the outcomes in terms of value and quality. So you need the success stories. So I think especially when in terms of, introducing a sort of new innovation, it's critical to find a client who's willing to partner with you on that.
Okay. Let me just pause here, just to see if the audience has any follow-up questions on what we've covered so far. Does anybody have a burning question, or I'll move on?
With the big bank. What I'm seeing is that there's like a lot of changing systems. If you come in 1 year, the next year when you come in, it'll be like different systems that replaced legacy systems that got upgraded. There's more integration. How do you independently assure that the data integrity and completeness and everything with, because I know they have the implementations, the testing, but from an independent source, how would you do that if you didn't use some sort of data automation or data analytics or whatever?
I would try to answer that question. Typically, in those scenarios, if the system change is pretty significant, it is important for the auditors also to be involved at the time of implementation. So in many cases, we get involved in the pre-implementation review capacity. So when we are doing that, we look at how we are going to audit after the go-live date of that system. So instead of coming post-mortem after the go-live and trying to find out what would be the new audit automation technique, we kind of look at it at the time of implementation itself.
So if I can maybe just add, I know this is not the direct question you asked, but just, I think it's later down in the question, so I apologize, Glenn, if I'm getting ahead of myself. So I think the important thing is, when we think about this as a profession and what we need to do, either from a research or development perspective, is sure, there's the challenge when your client switches systems during a period or moves from legacy systems to some form of integrated system. But I think the other angle of that challenge is we're going to be relying on data as a profession. So in today's world, our audits from an external perspective is very much sample-based, and it's pretty easy to get your head around a sample and be able to take a sample all the way through to the underlying data source and get comfortable that there's some form of validation, be that external or cross-checking on that data. When we fast forward and we think about this world of automation, we're going to have a lot more data. So regardless of whether our clients have changed systems during the year, we're going to be getting perhaps all the data in the client system. So we need to figure out as a profession, how do we get comfortable with that data? Because it can't be as simple as we run a sample and we draw that sample back to source documentation, because that kind of defeats the objective of this. So we've got to think of new ways to get comfortable around the integrity of the data. And obviously there's alternative procedures that can be performed around the client's control environments and checking completeness and reconciliations and all that good stuff. But we've really got to think of a new and creative way around proving the data integrity, irrespective of whether our clients change systems during the period or not. So we don't have the answer for that. Maybe one of the three panelists have, and if they can share it, that would be great. But I think that's the thing that we've got to work on going forward. Yeah, so if I heard the question, it's around 100% testing. So that clearly is what all four of us and our peers in the marketplace are certainly pushing towards, is 100% testing. I think it's we are right now is it's not 100% testing of every single thing that happened during the period. I think we've been very focused on what processes at a client's business, be that the procurement process, the sales process, the fixed asset process, whatever it may be, and doing 100% testing within that paradigm, because once you put a little bit of a box around it, it's a little bit easier to get your head around how you test the data and how do you bring the right analytics to bear.
And I think just to add to that is that it's some of it's going to be based on your traditional kind of getting comfortable around certain kind of fundamentals around how you change a system, right? So certain kind of basics around testing a system. I was just on a call with a vendor who was kind of surprised when we asked if they did performance testing on their application and things like that. So if those kind of fundamentals are there, it's not magic, right? It has to be supported with certain kind of baselines, which I assume that, especially in your organizations, I'm sure exist. So I think it's partnering and kind of leveraging those kind of existing kind of processes, and then kind of moving forward as was mentioned.
Okay, we got one more burning question over here.
I really have two questions, actually.
Oh, okay.
I have a lot more, but I guess my fundamental question is, what do you mean by audit automation? Are you talking about worksheet preparation or sampling, or are we extending it into, you talked about data mining, what about data tagging and some of the other sophisticated ends to it, where you can actually tie it to the general ledger, or take the general ledger and tie it to the financial statements, or reprocessing the general ledger completely? Second question I have is, you do this at a one-time effort, you do the annual audit, or do you do this continuously throughout the year to facilitate kind of a continuous view of the integrity and reliability of the financial statements?
Yeah, I'll go for the second part of the question first, because that's closer to my heart. That is because one of the major issues that clients are facing is that a lot of work is coming at the end of the year. So audit automation doesn't only mean efficiency, but also spreading of the workload throughout the year. So the objective here is that maybe in the first year it will be a lot more effort to set it up, but on an ongoing basis, you want to do that type of auditing, spreading across the year. And that's the biggest benefit of the audit automation for the client, because they don't get that workload that comes with the financial year-end audit. And that's definitely a part of the audit automation objective that we have.
And
so, for example, you're doing sample testing of the revenue transaction. And often that happens at the end of the year when you're picking up the sample for the whole year. And at the end of the year, you're asking for a lot of sample and evidences from the client. But if you take the approach of that data collection to happen on a quarterly or even monthly basis, and providing the sample requests throughout the year, that pressure that the clients are getting at the end of the year gets spread across the year. So that would be a great example of how you can really use audit automation to spread that load. And this becomes a continuous process, so there is not a big surprise coming at the end of the year.
But I think
Go ahead. Yes, we are doing that on a pilot basis, as I said, and our objective is to expand that with other clients.
And I think on your question on audit automation, so I mean, audit automation from my perspective would be, you are taking in all of, say, the journal entry data and recreating financial statements, being able to precisely see if I took the exact same data from the clients, can I get to the exact same financial statements, and to be able to tie those together. And I think that's pretty much across all of us. That step has become highly automated. For the clients that you can get that data appropriately for, and that you can then analyze across every single month or delve down into every transaction and see the trends and things that have happened for those, to be able to do things like the data analytics, correlation, et cetera. I would also say from things where you've got, say, a banking or an investment, being able to then marry that with an investment portfolio and being able to tie that directly in, as opposed to having back in the past where you'd have somebody tick and bop those things. I would say those are becoming far more highly automated now, as opposed to the test of doing samples. Or I think another further example of audit automation would then be taking that same, if you had an investment portfolio with market values, being able to take that to a third-party source and marry the two of those together on an automated basis and just have the exceptions follow. Does that answer the question for, sorry?
No, I was going to say, I think that's, so at the simplest sense, what is audit automation? It's turning the audit profession into an exception-based audit. So I think those are great examples. If you think of it today, and this is a overused analogy, is auditors are out on a lake in a fishing boat and they're using a sample to determine where to drop their fishing pole and drop their line to try and catch a fish. Well, we have the technology available right now where we can actually drain the entire lake and we can run all the transactions through a series of controls or check the client's controls on those transactions to identify the exceptions. So the value and the time that the professional spends is no longer around trying to construct the right sample to determine where to fish in the lake. The time that the professional spends now is on the exceptions that come out once they have drained the lake. So that can be in a process, that can be on journal entries. So the example I'll give you, and I think we're all doing this, is in any simple business they buy stuff and there's some fundamental controls around, what I ordered is what I received is what I paid for. In 20 years ago, we would send some very junior person into a strong room somewhere and they'd go and find invoices and they'd have to tick and tie them across. Well, your client's got a system that does that three-way match on the procurement side right now. Well, we should be able to get all that data and we should be able to check that control worked for all transactions. So that, at the simplest sense, is what audit automation is today. Now, when you think about where it's going is, well, we will have more sophisticated, we should have more sophisticated analytics. We should have more sophisticated professionals so we can start delving into the area of predictive analytics and cognitive learning, machine learning, so we're not just reperforming very simple tasks, but we're able to get ahead of that. And as you mentioned, during the period, not post the period, start predicting where transactions are going to go awry or where things are going to go awry so we can focus the audit evidence there.
Okay, let me take two more questions, Bill, and then we'll take Robert back there.
I started looking at the heading for the session, audit automation. We're certainly looking at the end results and systems. But David Bateman threw out a very interesting comment yesterday in the workshop about data scientists. Like, who are these? Everybody wants them, including the firms. I'm listening to Thomas talk and saying, he's not talking about what I once knew as an audit trainee proceeding to a professional designation.
Right.
He is looking for a data scientist. Which brings me to another observation about nobody's talking about audit software itself being automated. And I'm hearing one case where it's my example, where the partner or the manager of the job, one of the key elements he's looking for in a completed file is how many times was this worksheet opened and closed, because that's where the efficiencies or lack of efficiencies are. So this is going much further, I think, as a concept than just looking at the data from the clients. We're looking at it and saying, well, are you getting efficient? Are you using different staff, different skill sets? And because we have a large academic group, we need some information.
Right.
What's the new kid going to look like coming in?
We're only on question 4 on our list of 14 questions, so we're going to answer that question, trust me. Robert, go ahead.
Thank you. I did raise this a little bit yesterday. If we look at audit automation and what we're doing, I think we have to separate the statutory audit from an internal audit, which may benefit from this. I was cautioned very early on in my career that if you do 100% audit using a computer-assisted audit technique, that's really great. But if you have an audit failure and you are appearing in court and they say, how much did you audit with inventory? You say, well, we used a CAT, we did 100% of the inventory. And how much did you audit with receivables? We had 15 million customers out there. Well, we did a sample. Well, why didn't you do all 15 million, etc.? The point is that you might get down the slippery slope of, I chose to do 100% audit because it was easy, but I didn't do 100% audit here because it was difficult. And the courts would say, well, do you choose your audit testing because it's easy or difficult? How do you arrange your testing? What would the response be to that? I'd like to hear what your response is to that in court.
Remember, you're under oath now.
I'd like to give the response before going to the court or avoid going to the court. So I would say that it's really an integral part of the audit planning itself. So when you are doing the audit planning and deciding what audit procedure you're going to follow, that's where you need to take into account all the aspects, not only the opportunity to do audit automation, but more importantly, the audit risk. So if you are getting the coverage of the audit risk required through other procedure without audit automation, I think 20 years from now, we should be following a non-audit automation technique in those cases. But really where you're seeing that there is both benefits, that you can do that efficiently, as well as you're meeting the audit risk, that's where you go with the audit automation. Because audit, after all, is still a judgment-based profession. And you can bring in automation, but it has to have the right balance between the judgment and the automation and efficiency. So the real answer is really at the planning stage, how you are addressing the audit risk in the best possible way, both effectively and efficiently.
I think the other side of it is also when we embark into audit automation, it's like I think one of the challenges, which we'll discuss later, was that is also working with the national office and kind of working with them to kind of understand what is our exposure, and then part of that challenge is trying to sort of bring them on board in terms of kind of the procedures and things we're using, and to ensure that we're cleared from that kind of perspective, because there's a sort of, until the regulators and the sort of the internal people who kind of try to wonder what the regulators are going to do kind of get on the same page as to what is expected in terms of technology and its limitations and understanding how to use it. It's going to be a continuing challenge in terms of how we proceed with audit automation.
Okay, so let's continue on. I'm going to just ask the next question as kind of an open question, because I think you've kind of answered this question, just see if there's anything to fill in. But so talk a little bit about, is there anything left on the front in terms of motivation? Some of you have already talked about motivation, but is, how motivating is, say, staffing issues, hiring issues, training issues, effectiveness, efficiency? Just anybody can just jump in here, but what's driving you guys towards audit automation? What's the driving factors? Just anybody could jump in.
I'll start. So I think earlier, we said, the CPA Ontario accounting is, exciting now. It is trying to make it a little bit more exciting. For some reason, staff didn't really like the tick, the bob, looking at the accounting, and getting them to be able to drive, to be able to innovate, to think about what can we do with the data, what can we do to transform what the audit is from the, checking and ad nauseum tests, or that is something that is certainly also very motivating to keeping people in the profession and to keeping people at least interested in what they're looking at. I joke, when I started at E&Y, we had one computer per staff, as opposed to those staff that are starting now. My children at age 3 were doing PowerPoint demonstrations, so it's a very different philosophy and different that they're coming from, and trying to keep people excited about the profession, I think, is another one of the key things for this.
I'm going to mention this in my presentation tomorrow, but I think one area, it's actually from a quote from KPMG out of the UK, is really disruption. What I think kind of fear is that sort of in the quote, what I believe his name is Ian Moffat, he was mentioning that he was talking about, I guess they were doing Porter 5-4, some kind of strategic workshop, and what he mentioned is that, we looked at our traditional competitors. They didn't mention Deloitte for some reason. What they mentioned was that we're also worried about Google and Amazon, right? And I think that is a concern, as Bill was mentioning, is like about data science and these kind of things. Is that what is that? Is someone else going to come up with an algorithm? Is that will there'll be a new sort of competitor on the market that can suddenly take us out, that's not from the traditional kind of realm of CPA, etc.
So I mean, I'm glad you supported our quotes. so the two things so it's as a statutory audit, so external audits, I think the drive, one of the major driving forces is relevance. So 30 years ago, people would buy and sell, people would use financial statements to make investment decisions. People aren't waiting 75 days to get a set of financial statements anymore. They're making investment decisions based on what they see in Twitter and in social media, and they're trading on the day. So I think as a profession, we're struggling with, fast forward 40 years from today, what's our relevance in the marketplace? So we have to embrace technology, we have to embrace data analytics. And I think the second point around the change in landscape is perhaps a little bit of an offhanded, but a joke that we use at KPMG is, the market that the way we've run an audit profession for the last 100 years is we buy people wholesale and we sell them retail. So that's changing. Technology is changing that paradigm, and the skills that we need to bring to bear, clients aren't prepared to pay retail anymore for wholesale. And then the final point that's driving this is, maybe less so in North America, but certainly in the rest of the world, is that the demographics of the population is changing. So the number of professionals coming out of university, that the population's aging. We don't have as many recruits and interns in a couple of years as we do today. So we need to, we're not going to solve that problem. The only way we solve that problem is bringing technology to bear.
Okay.
I'll just add one more point on that, is that data processing that is happening 20 years ago and today is significantly different. Even the same application which was 20 years ago and their latest release is completely different from that. So after all, the accounting profession is changing because the dependence on the systems and application is a lot more now. So now when you look at it from the audit angle, and if you're not taking an approach where you are relying on the system again in the similar way, then you're really not doing the audit which is tailored to the latest version of the data processing that they are having. So that's one of the, I think, the key drivers for us as professional, us as methodology people, to change our approach to fit into that new realm of data processing.
Okay, very good. So let's look at the other side of the coin. So what are the challenges, inhibitors, what's slowing this up? And let me make somewhat of a pejorative statement here. For some of us old-timers, we remember the accounting firms have always talked about technology. Leaders, you'll see the president of one of your firms or your CEO talking about it. And I remember visiting the PwC. Well, it was just PW in those days. Their research center, I think it was San Jose. There was a whole group of people there working on expert systems. And I interviewed some of those people last year. And I said, whatever happened to those expert systems? And they're like, well, a lot of the partners in the field thought they could make decisions faster than the expert system could make the decisions. And they didn't want to learn how to use it, and unless the home office made it mandatory, and so on and so on. So some of us old timers were kind of like, well, we want to see this in action. So what's inhibiting now? What's the big challenges, and how are you going to overcome those challenges? And why don't we start with Janice down there?
I think we've talked about some of them. So getting data in the first place is still, I think, one of the bigger issues, but definitely having the field change, like having the total change and the way you're thinking about doing the audit and asking and requesting to have data analytics and taking the investment of the time to be able to put it in. And then I would say as well, knowing what to do with it afterwards. So I think from a partner perspective, your fear is you have staff that will go in, they get a million different anomalies and then spend 4 weeks to delve into that, where previously maybe you would have spent, 2 days in testing it the other way. So trying to get that balance for people to understand when you're looking at something, what you're supposed to do with it, and effectively deal with it, as opposed to, as I would say, going down the rabbit hole and expanding the time.
Okay.
I would take it more from the client's perspective. I think what our experience has been is that the finance and accounting side of the client's organization are adopting to audit automation more than the technology people. The reason being is that it's not that the IT are against it. It's really the time which is required from them in an audit automation world is more than what it used to be before. The finance is finding that their time is going down because now the data is going to come in a much more automated way, so they are motivated to do that. But the IT people are finding that now my time will be more needed to provide that data. So I think that's an interesting inhibitor that we are finding, and that's where I think the early adopters are very important, where the IT or the technology group of any organization is also motivated to do that. If we can do that, that's how you start addressing that issue.
I mean, it's a minefield of challenges. We could be here for the next 3 days, and we'd still be going through the list. I think the things that, in addition to what's already been mentioned, is one of the things that we struggle with is just how do you create audit evidence. So, the example we use is, when we all use Netflix. Netflix makes predictions on our movies that we should use. If Netflix makes a bum prediction and you end up watching a movie you don't want to watch, it's okay. So the algorithm runs at about an 80% accuracy. Well, in an audit perspective, 80% is not good enough. We've got to get the stuff to something north of 95% accuracy. So a big challenge there is there's lots of good technology, there's lots of cool technology, there's lots of really smart people. It's just how do we take all this stuff, pull it together, and create audit evidence, something that, for the old timers in the room, where we can go to a partner who signed an opinion and say, you used to do it this way, it gave you this evidence, you can now do it this way, and it gives you the same or more evidence. So I think it's around being able to take all these exceptions, all these outliers, all these results, and convert that into audit evidence. And then I think the second area is just working as a profession to change the auditing standards as required, to change the way that our recruits get trained so that we don't get ahead of, the technology doesn't get ahead of the professional, and the professionals evolve along with the technology. So I know we'll talk a little bit about this later, but an audit professional 10 years from today will look very different than they do today. And as a result of that, we need to start investing now and change them now so that they can keep abreast of what the technology is. So we have no shortage of good ideas, no shortage of good technology. It's just technology is only a part of the problem.
Okay.
I think one of the sort of looming challenges that we'll have to kind of figure out as a profession is as you move more and more to automation, what's going to have to change is sort of the paradigm as to how we bill, right, as a firm, because if we're going to keep automating and getting, because traditionally it's an hour-based kind of fee, we generate fees is through hours, right? So now if you take a process that used to take 100 hours to manually, now you do it in an hour. The client says, "Hey, can you pass on that savings to me? Are we going to move to a $1,000 audit?" Right? So it's that I think this is kind of something looming that we as a profession will have to kind of pivot from more from a kind of fee, hourly kind of based to more like kind of value based kind of way of auditing. So it's otherwise it's it goes back to what I said earlier about the disruptors who can kind of deliver the $1,000 audit will sort of take over.
Just as a follow-up, I was thinking what Janice was saying about her 3-year-old children doing PowerPoint presentations. And again, correct this is my view, and feel free to argue with my view here, but, I always kind of think of an accounting firm as almost being upside down with technology, meaning it's the old partners who are my age who are probably more resistant to technology than the young people coming in. So is that a fair question? I mean, how resistant are partners to what you guys are trying to do? Is that a fair question, or is that?
I think it's a fair question. Being an audit partner,
well, I know you're all partners, so.
Yeah. It certainly, it is a task, and I think one of the things that was talked about before is you need to show successes, right? So you need to be able to say, this is why you want to be able to do it. We talk about drivers for this. Well, if you are being asked by every one of your clients, what analytics are you using? How are you doing this? If you want to keep this work, you better show it to me, or if you want to attain this work, do you want to show this to you? That becomes a much easier driver to be able to get partners to quickly get on board for those that perhaps wouldn't otherwise be on board. I would say the age of the partners are like varied, where there are a number that aren't quite as old that embrace this and really want to be able to see it as well. So. But it is a bit of a challenge, but I think the drivers and motivators that we have talked about certainly help to be able to push it.
From my experience, it's really not the age or who is old-timer. I find the mindset different depending on the old-timer or new, but it's really the issue is that how somebody is comfortable with technology. You can be not an old-timer, very recent graduate, but fully focused on financial accounting and audit, do not like IT. If a person comes from that background, they will have more issues with audit automation. It has nothing to do with being involved in the traditional way of audit 20 years ago. In fact, my experience is that many of the partners that I work with who come from a lot of experience, they are the ones who are actually pushing audit automation now because they are seeing the challenges over the years that can be addressed by this.
Okay. Any other comments? Just no? Okay. So getting back to my list. Now, I've been involved with data mining since, I don't know when, the year 2000 or something, written several papers, did a study actually of the Big Four on data mining. And there's also this body of literature out there that basically say auditors, well, how should I say this? They get a lot of pushback from auditors when you talk about using non-financial data. I mean, there's research papers that I could quote and stuff, but in other words, auditors seem very uncomfortable with non-financial data. The pushback you typically get is there's no gap for non-financial data. And in fact, I think that was kind of one of the questions somebody in the audience was sort of asking was, you know, how do you know about the data integrity and all this kind of stuff? Well, if you're going to move into real audit automation and big data, you're going to have to confront non-financial data. So we'll start with Malik on this side, I guess. I mean, how is that world going to change? How are you going to convince partners that non-financial data is okay?
Well, I think it's one of the things is, again, it goes back to, selling the message to the firm is to demonstrate how, this technology is going to make your life easier. And going back to sort of what I started off with is that, and that's what we're seeing in terms of sort of the, using one of the, what we have is a contracts review tool, which is, it's completely, it looks at, kind of analyzes agreements and kind of pulls out, key terms and things like that. And it's actually, it's quite fascinating how people are just taking that tool and running with it and trying to find different ways of using it in terms of just, there was a kind of like these base use cases, and now they're finding new different use cases. I think that once, the technology is easy to use, and in terms of it does make people's lives easier. I think that that goes a long way in terms of proliferating that changes when it comes to non-financial data, because that's what we're seeing. Okay,
Thomas.
So I think so one of the things we're conscious to keep reminding ourselves is to separate development from use. So we're all in a little bit of that prototype stage where we're trying to figure out what data to use. I think once we've determined what non-financial data to use and we've built mechanisms around it, I think that's very, very different from the use of it. So at least our professionals our hypothesis is our professionals, if we can get them comfortable that we've done the work on the back end with the right tools and the right people to place reliance on the data, they'll use the data. So we're conscious to remind ourselves is we don't want 67,000 auditors out there trying to figure out what Twitter is telling them about their particular client. We need to develop the tools on that and make the technology less invasive from a non-financial data perspective. We need to do that nationally or regionally or globally and the professional gets to focus on the results of it, and we need to package those results up. So we have certain tools in place today where we use non-financial data, and people are receptive to it. Obviously, we get lots of questions around how can we place reliance on the data, what work have we done to be able to place reliance on the data, but it's certainly a very easy bump to get over.
Okay. Dib?
Yeah, I think the non-financial data or financial data, the data validation or the data quality becomes important when it comes to audit. So whichever way you're using the data has to have that validity or an integrity that you can rely on. Because you may feel comfortable, but you may get challenged by the regulators down the road that how could you rely on this particular data? So it's not just the decision of the audit partner, it's really driven from the regulator's requirement to make sure that you're using the right data for the audit or evidence. So I would say that as long as you can find a way to validate the integrity of that data, whether it's financial or non-financial, that can be used. And that is, I think, part of the audit profession to figure it out.
Okay. Janice?
Yeah, and I think it's just going again to when we're looking at non-financial data is what is the relevance to it to the audit? If that's where you're trying to get to for the audit at the end, what can you use and what should be there as far as that non-financial data and that value to them? So I think, again, if you can show the value why you're going to go for this non-financial data, I think there's always ways around to be able to prove that data. You just need to make sure that it's not something that, oh, this looks good and nice, but has no relevance to you providing a better quality opinion. So I think in all of the things that we're looking for, it really is going back to, is it providing a higher quality audit? Is it providing a higher quality opinion that we're getting to in the end? And I know that's a high focus for all the firms at this point with a very, very strict regulatory environment that we operate in. We just can't afford to not be doing something that's doing that.
I got you. Well, let me ask I'll just ask this as an open question here. It's not on the list, but in the world of big data and data analytics, one of the issues that comes up, Michael and I wrote this in a paper we were working on, is this idea that out there in the world of marketing, the Amazons of the world, they're not into causality, they're into correlations. So they just love poking around in the data, looking for correlations. And this is just black and white, different than auditing. I mean, basically the way by the way, you can argue with me on that point, but the point being, when you think about an audit, you got your audit objectives, and then what tests are we going to run, and what are we going to do depending on the results of that test. So you're very much a causality, cause and effect kind of environment. But big data, it's all about correlations. We don't know why we have this correlation, but it's an interesting correlation. People who buy this book. We don't know why, but they do, kind of thing. So just as an open-ended question, how are you guys kind of dealing with this correlation, causation, poking around in the data kind of stuff? Thomas?
Well, so I'd love to say that we don't fall into the trap of chasing or going down rabbit holes based on what the data is telling us. But I think where we are today at KPMG and the way we plan on leveraging that correlation and causality is we are really focused on how we can use the data to help inform risk assessment, because that then helps us to get a lot more precise around the prediction of where the risks are in the engagement. So similar to your example of Amazon and how they poke around in the data, we need to be able to harness data, internal, external, structured, unstructured, build algorithms to help inform risk assessment on the engagement. I think that's where we're at right now. I think there's work ahead of us as a profession to figure out when we get further into the audit engagements, how can we convert that into actual audit evidence from a substantive or control testing perspective. So as an example, you can certainly use weather patterns to help inform what you think the performance of the company is going to be. I think we're all playing with that stuff right now from a risk assessment perspective, but I don't think we've broken all the way through yet where we've figured out, well, how can I rely on what weather.com is saying to place reliance and generate audit evidence and take a whole bunch of traditional procedures out of the way. So I think we're on a journey as it comes to using data and prodding around with the data, and I think it's going to be trial and error as we do this on pilot engagements and we figure out what data sources are the ones that are relevant for the purpose of planning an audit. And those data sources, this is the challenge, will be different by country, geography, and by industry. So it's really going to be tough for us to figure that all out before we get to the point of being able to say, well, there's a correlation, there's a causation, this is a new audit procedure.
Okay. Anybody else? Comments on the correlation, causation?
I think the same type of thing. I think that is certainly where things are going as we proceed, is really looking at the correlations to get to the predictive analytics, like where should we be worried about in the future versus the looking back, which I would say is really more so the focus at this point in time, looking at what you already have. Certainly I know kind of across all the firms we're looking at like the predictive and all of the different things that you can see for some of those correlations out in the market, and trying to get the access to more and more external data to be able to compare that to what you're looking for. But I think we also understand we need to get to that new future state as well. And we certainly see our clients doing it. So a lot of our clients certainly will be taking very, very different data or looking at things where you would not think the two could go together, but really do. So.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. Graham, did you have a pressing question out there? Okay. I saw his hand up. Graham, go ahead and ask a pressing question.
Actually, I probably should have asked this when you were talking about non-financial data. We are under the assumption that this non-financial data is strictly related to financial statements. The rest of the world, South Africa in particular, is looking at non-financial data integrated into reports, sustainability reports, and that's a lot of the non-financial data. And I don't know whether we're ready to move in the U.S. and Canada into integrating all those sustainability reports and social responsibility reports, but that's a lot of the non-financial data that the rest of the world is considering now. And I don't know, well, I gave a talk in Turkey, and I said most of those sustainability reports could probably be considered fraud, which went over really well. But and some of the South Africans say, well, we still need to have this. People want that information, but that's a challenge. I think that that's non-financial data that people are going to start asking you guys to integrate into your reports, and I'm not sure how you're going to do that.
So I'll fess up, I'm a South African, so I'll meet you in the parking lot later. So I think as it relates to sustainability reporting, I think if we think about the assurance landscape, I think the area that will help get us there in this part of the world is, I think it's going to be internal audit and the continuous risk assessment and assurance package within an entity that needs to be developed and evolved first. So we need the compliance officers, we need the clients thinking about what are those other things that I need assurance over from a continuous risk assessment, monitoring, and a complete assurance package. And I think once that's matured within the marketplace, particularly in North America, I think only then will it have some relevance in the external audit. Because I agree with you, if we just started relying on some random reporting around where we add value, what we do into the environment, we don't have the history within which to ensure that data is relevant or reliable to the external audit. So I think it's got to come from organically from the company itself and from the profession. I think that gets driven out of the compliance function in an organization around trying to get a complete view around assurance, and then it will permeate into the external audit.
I would agree with Thomas, because the non-financial data that you're talking about would be more relevant for the internal auditors than external auditors. Of course, relevant for external auditors too. But really, the push needs to come from there, because the role of internal auditor in an organization really is more and more getting attached to the operations, the objectives of the operations, sustainability, all that stuff. So if internal audit takes more lead on that, there will be certain portions of that becomes relevant for external audit.
But I think at the same time, it will also have to be the market asking for validation of that information. So until you have somebody demanding to say, did Volkswagen really have the appropriate emission standards or not? Or, do you want a report to prove that information is correct? You also won't get people behind it, or like the desire for people to pay for it. So it will be the demand to say, is this truthful?
Okay. Did you have a question, Bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm curious, the culture of the firms. So we've got 4 global firms represented up here. Where is the center for doing the R&D in this area? I don't think you're going to let it go haphazard around different parts of the world where your firms are. But I'm losing sight of, is E&Y still focused on Cleveland for R&D? Is KPMG still focused on Montvale? Is PwC, New York, and London? Deloitte, I'm not quite sure where you have been historically, but certainly not Canada for any great amount. But I'm curious as to what's driving and holding you with your feet to the fire on this issue. Where is it done?
So, I mean, I'll go. Sorry.
No, you go.
I was going to say, yes, we're still in northern New Jersey, wonderful Montvale. You're all more than welcome to come down there. It's beautiful.
All right. Been there.
So that's where we're located in terms of where the strategic decisions are driven out of. But what's holding us accountable is obviously we have an audit strategy. We recognize that this is foundational to where we want to take our external audit and our internal audit profession. And I guess the firm as a whole around leveraging technology, leveraging data, because we recognize it's a key driver to future growth. In terms of how we actually are rolling this out, I'm sure it's similar to my peers at the panel here. We're building ideas and doing a lot of the deep research in Montvale with a team that's present as well as virtual teams, and then we're working with key countries and key engagements to kind of get them on that journey. So this is not we build something and we're shipping it to every KPMG member firm around the world. This is rather us building an idea and then going to a country or an engagement and testing that idea with the client, where the client's palatable to that, and building it out, bringing it back to the mothership, and kind of continuously evolving it. And I think the reason we've taken that journey and still driving it out that way from a KPMG perspective is it's going to take a number of years for us to get audit automation fully embedded into the technology. So we all put publications out there that talk about how advanced we are, but the reality is when we get down to the brass tacks of really transforming the way an audit's executed, this is going to take us a number of years, because we've done an audit the same way for 100 years. It's going to take us a good decade or a decade and a half to really transform that, because it's not just technology, it's people, it's methodology, it's being able to convert audit evidence. So that's kind of how we're approaching it.
In terms of actually Chris Thatcher, who I'm filling in for, he's the head of Global Audit Innovation. He's based out of Toronto, and sort of the structure there is out of the UK, but a lot of the innovation's happening out of New York in terms of that type of thing. But I think that part of our challenge is is trying to effectively collaborate across the whole world, and kind of because everyone has is trying to react in a timely manner to their specific market. So it's how do we as a firm kind of collaborate and ensure that that we bring high quality innovation to the sort of the global firm.
In our case, I think it's mostly driven from US and UK, but we are now a lot more collaborative. We have actually initiatives in Canada that we are taking to the global space. So it's most of the best of breed category are coming together, as opposed to, say, 10 years ago, it was all driven from UK or US, but now there is collaboration coming from many of the other countries like Canada, Germany, Netherlands. We are coming together to bring the best instead of duplicating something in another place.
Yeah, and I would say we're very similar, both European and United States. Cleveland, also a wonderful hub also is exciting to go to. But I would echo the same comments. I think when we're seeing on the other side is also from our advisory practices and really looking at unstructured data and things that they're doing, and then bringing that information back into the audit practices as well, so we can see that from around the world. So what different of our advisory practices are doing, say, in Australia or in China, Japan, et cetera, and making sure that the global firm is all taking advantage of all of that. So I'd say in this era of innovation, where innovation starts, it spreads, and trying to ensure that we're sharing that across.
And sometimes I would just add is that sometimes it is industry focused. So
Yeah.
some of the countries are a lot more specialized in certain industry, so where the other countries kind of follow them. So audit automation is not just a generic audit automation. Sometimes it is an industry focused audit automation too. So that counts.
Okay, keeping in mind that anything you say will not leave this room, I have a question. No, actually, you're being filmed. But Janice mentioned this just in passing, and I wrote it down. Could you talk just, and this is just an open-ended question, anybody can answer this question any way you want, but regulators and standards, audit regulators, audit standards, are they in the way or are they on the side? And if they're in the way, in other words, if they're an inhibitor to audit automation, what kind of changes need to be made in the regulator standard setting environment to help audit automation go forward? Anybody?
Yeah. So certainly, like, the standards that we have in place have been the same standards from a data analytics, et cetera, perspective that we've had for a very long period of
Right.
time. So there certainly is a consortium of all of the firms in the U.S. working with AICPA, as well as working with CPA Canada. We're aware of that. My counterpart in the U.S. that leads it is part of, and looking at what changes do need to be made to the specific standards that takes into account what we are doing with data analytics and how much comfort can you get from those, and then how you can use that from a controls testing perspective, because certainly PCAOB or that is very focused on how we would test controls and whether or not you have enough comfort, and to be able to use data analytics within that is a key component to look at going forward. So it is something that is being looked to be able to change and would need to get the full extent of this.
I would just turn this around as regulators not being an inhibitor, but really a driver for the audit automation. I'll give you a couple of examples. One would be the completeness of population. That has been one of the issues that regulators have brought up in many, many instances in the past. But with audit automation, actually, you can address that particular issue, showing that how you're getting your population or how you're selecting your samples on a true random manner. Those are the things that you can give a lot more comfort there. The other one would be something like segregation of duty or access security. In many of this complex system, without using an automated technique, very difficult to get a complete picture of that segregation of duty or access control issue. And that's one of the things that regulators are often looking into. So I would say that audit automation is actually a way to answer many of the questions that the regulators have been asking over the years.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not going to add too much. So the audits we're executing today are clearly compliant with the standards, and I think similar to ourselves, the regulators, the standard setters, we're all on a journey here, and I think it's a case of we're all going to learn and we're going to evolve and adapt the standards as we go. And I know for us, as long as we keep pointing towards improving audit quality, I think it's a very easy conversation with the regulators and others around making the changes. And I'm sure that in the years ahead of us, we will identify things that are going to need the standards to change. We have the ability to be a whole lot more precise in terms of measuring risk. We're going to have the ability to do one procedure, like draining the lake. Is that a control test? Is that a substandard procedure? Is it an analytical review? Is it a risk assessment procedure? Those kind of things are going to force us to think about the standards a little differently as we go forward. So I think we're all aligned. I think it's going to take us time collectively to evolve things.
Yeah, I think that in terms of regulators are a key piece of the equation in terms of bringing true kind of audit automation to the profession. Just borrowing from sort of in terms of I guess just sort of an incident that I don't know if you guys remember when Oracle was suing Google for copyright infringement so Oracle was making its case to the judge, but the judge could program. And so basically, based on his knowledge of programming, he laughed at the lawsuit because they said they were claiming a range check was difficult to do, and the judge I did that on the weekend. So he threw sort of the case out based on that. So the level of tech savviness of people who are, in terms of their understanding of data and technologies, and as we were talking about earlier about correlation versus causation, these kinds of things. Once the regulator's mindset, catches, the more they know, the more it's going to affect us, and that I think will be, as was mentioned, will be a key enabler of change.
Okay. Did you still have a question? Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll just jump back first.
Okay.
Could you talk more about how you're acquiring and onboarding the best technology talent? Because it seems like they're not necessarily drawn to the audit industry, they're more drawn to ones like Google, Facebook, and Goldman Sachs. Especially because you're building really complex systems and you need the top people teams.
Yeah, so how are you guys competing in this space? I mean, this goes beyond accounting professionals. I mean, especially getting back to Bill's question, in wherever your skunk works are, where you're actually doing this development work, how are you competing in this environment for data scientist type people against the Googles and the Facebooks of the world? Just as an open-ended question to anybody.
Well, so I mean, we are competing. So thankfully, we're not trying to build a Google at KPMG. So we can be a lot more targeted and focused around who we're trying to get to. So when we think about the talent that we currently have and the talent that we need going forward, it's not just a data scientist, it's not just an IT individual, it's a team of all of those folks. So, and what we need to put at the core of this is an audit professional. So the important thing we've learned is you need someone that's done audits, that understands what an audit objective is, that has industry expertise, to be able to focus what we're trying to do. So if you lock a bunch of data scientists in a room, they'll find some pretty cool stuff, but it will have zero relevance to an audit. If you put a bunch of IT people in a room, they'll build something that's really cool and shiny, but it doesn't have any relevance to the audit. So the struggle we have is not necessarily in getting the right talent and recruiting that talent, because you can find it. It's just how do you bring all those talent pools together and ensure you have something productive. And we often joke that the perfect auditor of the future is an auditor with a splash of data scientists, a splash of project management, a splash of IT. We're not going to be able to get that individual, so we've got to figure out how do we get the right individuals, centralize those individuals where appropriate. So if we need a whole boatload of data scientists, we need to be at Silicon Alley or Silicon Valley trying to recruit those people so we have the best and brightest, but it's not hundreds and hundreds, it's the right people that understand what we're trying to do within internal and external audit.
I'll just add to that is that there are two perspectives here. I call it mindset and skill set. You can have talent and skill set, great, but if the mindset or the interest is not there for a technology professional to understand audit, that type of person, even if you bring them together, may or may not work. But the chances are much higher of success when you have somebody who has the interest into the business and the audit world, but coming from technology. And this particular area of audit automation really requires those kind of people who has interest on both and how to use the knowledge in one side on the other. And that we find that is what we are looking for. Not necessarily the best technical person, not necessarily the best audit person, the people who have the right balance.
Okay. The gentleman behind you had a question?
First, a disclaimer. The last audit I actually did was probably about 30 years ago. But in some respects, it's, to quote the dearly departed, it's like deja vu all over again. I had a conversation, it's got to be 30 years ago, with the CEO of a public company client of mine. And he said to me, we're going to get to the day when, and it's got to be soon, when I can come and call you guys up and you come bring your computer and plug it into my computer. And your computer's going to ask my computer questions and your computer's going to figure out what it's saying and it's going to tell you that everything's okay. He said, well, what do you think of it? I said, well, yeah, I don't think it's much more different than people talking to each other. That, we've got to be able to have the same language so we can communicate. When we have the same language, we've got to be able to understand that the linguistics so that I'm sure that your computer hasn't misunderstood what my computer is asking, and that my computer understands what your computer is telling it, and also that your computer isn't lying to my computer. Well, if that client, if he's still alive, was here today, I think he'd probably be shaking his head and saying, well, what is this about? It's going to be several more years. I mean, is there any substance to the possibility that his vision might come to be realized?
I think as we mentioned, I think the key challenge to that is really it's the data. This is like I think the biggest challenge is how do we cross that hurdle in terms of getting the data from the client in a way that's quick and easy, and then also being able to get that sort of context of the data. What does that data mean in an automated way? That's why I see this as sort of still to be the challenge, and until we conquer that data acquisition problem, for all our clients, it's still going to be difficult to fully automate.
Well, I was going to say, well, until there's absolutely no judgment in anything that you put in the financial statements, I would hope we're not there, like where you're just going to have a computer to a computer. Certainly, generally, our areas of focus, once you can get past the day-to-day transactions, is where management has put in judgment to coming up with the number that they put in, that everything isn't completely data focused and that I could plug and play and say X times Y equals Z every single time. And I think what we've seen since that 30 years is the complexity of some of the transactions, the complexity of trying to value certain things has just increased tremendously since that period of time. So the data analytics is getting us to be able to focus on that as opposed to having to focus 25, 30 years ago, can we just see that these numbers actually tie to the financial statements?
So I totally agree with that. So I think the important thing is judgment's not going away in the execution of an engagement. So the computer's talking to the computers. The reality is today, technology is an order of magnitude more powerful and an order of magnitude cheaper. Our clients have invested. So we should be able to get all the simple languages going between the two. And audit professionals should be exercising the majority of the time on the stuff that the computer couldn't quite handle, the transaction that didn't quite go down the programmed road that we need to identify, understand. And the difference to today is I think we're doing that plus we're doing the computer-to-computer language. So I think that's the opportunity. And will it be another 30 years? God, I hope not. I don't think so, because I think that just the pace of change, the investments our clients are making in this stuff, it's going to move a lot quicker. So we often joke, there will be a stage where someone wanders up to IBM Watson and says his financial statements, and Watson will spit something out. I don't think we'll ever get there, but we'll certainly be able to bring cognitive computing and machine learning to engagements in the not too distant future.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm getting the time signal here real quick. I got 5 minutes, Elise, or a couple minutes? 2 minutes? 2 minutes. Okay, in 2 minutes, so this is 30 seconds for each of you. What can we do to help you, we academics, either in research and or teaching? You got 30 seconds. Malik, go.
I think that what you were discussing is to kind of look into those areas of big data, of correlation, causation, and understanding that interplay. How does big data fundamentally change how we the audit methodology?
Okay, Thomas, 30 seconds.
So it's three simple things. We need to change the learning curriculum or evolve the learning curriculum for our professionals that are coming through universities and schools to be more data literate and more data scientist based. We need to do a whole bunch of research around what analytics capabilities can be brought to bear. So there's lots of smart statisticians. How do we convert that into audit evidence? And then we need help figuring out what does audit evidence mean in the future.
Okay, Dib, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would say that the university programs, especially on the audit professional side, has to include areas of technology and the audit automation ingrained. That's not something that they should be expecting to learn on the job, but come out from the university with that knowledge to quite an extent. Then we won't have these kind of challenges that we are facing in finding the right type of resource. So I think the program itself has to bring in audit automation within the program rather than coming as an experience after coming out as either an IT person or an audit person.
Janet, 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I think just again, changing the mindset of the people to a data analytic mind, changing from doing transactions to looking at whole populations and how you change that, as well as everything else everybody else said.
All right, I guess my time is up, right? All right, give my panel a round of applause. Thank you.